Om Shri Paramatmane Namaha. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudriyet. SrimadBhagvadGeeta Sadhaka Sanjeevani 12th chapter. The Devotional Service. Introduction. Now Arjuna had a curiosity to know which devotees, that is, those who worship God with attributes or those who worship the unmanifested attributeless Brahma, are better. So he puts the question. Verses 1 to 12. The Lord pronounces his verdict: who is superior, the worshippers of God with attributes or without attributes, and mentions 4 spiritual paths which lead to God realization. Verse 1. Arjuna Uvacha Evam Sattata Yukta Ye Bhaktastvam Paryupaste Ye Chapya Akshram Avyaktam Tesham Ke Yoga Vittamaha. Arjuna said, those devotees who ever steadfast thus worship thee, God with attributes, and those again who worship the imperishable and the unmanifested, which of them are better versed in yoga? Comment. A striver commits an error that while performing the spiritual activities, he holds that he has affinity for God, but while performing mundane actions, he thinks that he has affinity for the world. The reason is that he has not fixed God realization as the only aim of his life. If he realizes that the only aim of human life is God realization and sticks to it, his all activities will conduce him to God realization. If an aspirant thinks of the Lord at the beginning of the activity and at its end, it means that he has thought of the Lord even during the performance of the activity, in the same way as a businessman, while making entries in the account book, gets so much absorbed in it that he even forgets who he is and why he is making those entries and calculations. Though it seems forgetfulness, yet it is not forgetfulness, because he has his aim in his mind. A striver always believes that he is only God's, and whatever action he performs is only for him. The Lord answers Arjuna's question in the next verse pertaining to the superiority of the worshippers who worship God with attributes and those who worship attributeless God. Verse 2. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Maya Vishya Mano Ye Mam Nitya Yukta Upaste Shraddhya Paryopetaste Me Yukta Tamamataha. The blessed Lord said, those who fixing their mind on me worship me ever steadfast and endowed with supreme faith are the most perfect in yoga, in my opinion. Comment. The strivers don't understand the spiritual teaching imparted in the religious discourses by the saints and the scriptures without having a keen desire and curiosity. But if they have a keen desire to know it, they pay special attention and listen to it with faith and study the scriptures carefully. Therefore, the strivers should listen to the religious discourses and study the scriptures carefully, considering them for them, and translate those teachings into practice. A striver commits an error that he, instead of getting absorbed himself, practices to absorb his mind and intellect in him. So, there is a general complaint that striver's mind and intellect don't get absorbed in him. Through the concentration of mind and intellect, he can attain the state of trance, but he can't realize God. God realization is possible only if he himself gets absorbed in him. The striver whose only aim, instead of hankering after worldly pleasures and prosperity, is God realization, it means that he has started realizing his real affinity for God. When he fully realizes this real affinity, he has not the least desire to hanker after the worldly pleasures and prosperity through the mind, intellect, senses, and body, etc. A striver has faith in the thing or person, etc., whom he considers the best, and then he follows the principle decided by him without deviating from it. A person's mind is fixed on the object or person he loves, and his intellect is fixed on the object or person in whom he has faith. If he is a lover, he seeks company of the beloved, but if he has faith, he ever remains ready to carry out the order of the adored one. He who loves only God ever realizes his affinity for him and never feels separation from him. Therefore, such type of devotees are the most perfect in yoga in the Lord's opinion. In the preceding verse, the Lord declared the worshippers of God with form and attributes to be the best yogis. So the question arises whether the worshippers of the attributeless absolute Brahma are not the best yogis. The Lord answers the question in the next two verses. Verses 3 and 4. Ye tva aksharam anirdeshyam avyaktam parupaste sarvatragam achintyam cha kutastham achalam dhruvam sanimeyandriya gramam sarvatra sama buddhya te prapnuvanti mam eva sarva bhuta hitte rataha. But those who worship the imperishable, the undefinable, the unmanifest, the omnipresent, the unthinkable, the unchanging, and the immobile, the constant, by restraining all the senses, being even minded, everywhere engrossed in the welfare of all beings, also come to me. Comment. If senses are not fully controlled, there is difficulty in the worship of the attributeless absolute. The senses of the devotees who worship the Lord with attributes are fixed on Him, and so there is not so much need of controlling the senses as it is for the devotees who worship attributeless Brahma. Such devotees, having no base for thought, without controlling the senses, can think of the object of senses and thus can perish. Therefore, for the devotees who worship the attributeless God, it is necessary to control not only the senses fully but also the mind, because so long as there is attachment of the mind to the objects of senses, the absolute Brahma cannot be attained. It is necessary for both the strivers, whether they worship God with attributes or God without attributes, to remain engrossed in the welfare of all beings. When a striver thinks that his own welfare is different from the welfare of all beings, it means that he has the egoistic notion, which is a stumbling block to God realization. When a striver performs all actions, eating, drinking, sleeping, etc., as well as chanting his name, meditation, study of the scriptures, etc., for the welfare of the world, his egoistic notion comes to an end, and God's power, which is ever engaged in the welfare of all beings, supports him. Real service does not consist in offering objects and in bodily service, but in thinking of the welfare of all beings without any selfish motive or reward. He should serve them as he serves the limbs of his body, without expecting any fruit. As a common man, without receiving any moral teaching, serves his body very scrupulously without being proud of the act, so does a God realized soul remain engrossed in the welfare of all beings through the likeness of the self, without having the least pride or egoistic notion. A striver should ever follow the footsteps of such a God realized soul scrupulously. In these two verses, the Lord has mentioned four factors pertaining to the worshippers of attributeless Brahma. First, the form of the attributeless absolute. Second, condition of the striver. Third, the form of worship. Fourth, what the striver attains. Such strivers behold the attributeless absolute everywhere, all the time, in all objects and persons, etc. It is on account of body consciousness and acceptance of the separate existence of worldly objects, there is desire to enjoy sense objects, and thus sense objects are enjoyed. Strivers of the absolute don't regard any independent existence of anything except God. So they don't attach any importance to worldly pleasures and don't want to enjoy them because for them the pleasures have no separate existence. Such strivers, being even minded, remain engrossed in the welfare of all creatures. His worship is that he has a constant eye on the attributeless absolute. The Lord declares that those who worship attributeless God also attain him. It means that God with attributes and God who is attributeless are one and the same. The Lord in the next three verses describes the difficulty and ease of the two kinds of worship. Verse 5. क्लेशोऽधिकतरस्तेषाम् अव्यक्तासक्ताश्चेत्साम् अव्यक्ता हि गतिर्दुःखम् देहावद्भिरवाप्यते. The difficulty of those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested is greater, for the goal of the unmanifested is hard to reach by the body conscious beings. Comments. The strivers whose thoughts are set on the unmanifested are those who regard the worship of the attributeless absolute as superior, but whose minds have not entered the attributeless absolute. In order to enter the absolute, a striver should possess three qualities. First, interest, inclination. Second, faith. And third, qualification. Such strivers, having heard the glory of the absolute, develop a bit of inclination and having faith, start the spiritual discipline. But because of the identification of the self with the body and because of the lack of dispassion, their minds don't comprehend the absolute. They remain attached to the bodies, but having heard the glory of the unmanifest and regarding this worship as superior to others, they get attached to it. But attachment to the unmanifest is extremely difficult. An important fact. Now it is explained how the worship of God who is endowed with the attributes is easy, while the worship of attributeless God is difficult. Worship of God with attributes. First, such a striver can easily fix his senses and mind on God because he is with form and attributes. He can think of him, listen to his life history and pastime, and can adore him easily. Therefore, there is less possibility of his dwelling on the worldly objects. Second, it is attachment to the world which causes difficulty in the spiritual path. Such a striver depends totally on God as a kitten depends on its mother. For such a striver, God secures what is not already possessed and preserves what he already possesses. In the Mansa, also it is mentioned that God, like the mother who looks after the child, looks after the devotees who worship him only depending on him. So they easily get rid of the worldly attachment. Third, such strivers attain the Lord quickly. Fourth, the Lord himself destroys the darkness born of ignorance of such strivers. Fifth, the Lord straightway delivers them from the ocean of death-bound existence. Sixth, if devotees take refuge in him alone, the Lord by his grace releases them from any subtle vice if it subsists in them. 7. They have full faith in Lord who pervades everywhere. It is because of their faith that they take refuge in him and the Lord grants them the yoga of discrimination, that is, wisdom by which they attain him. 8. They believe that the Lord is the most gracious to all beings. So, by his grace, they cross all the obstacles and quickly attain him. 9. No one can ever remain even for a moment without doing work. So the devotee has to offer those actions to God. By doing so, he is easily liberated from the bondage of actions. 10. Such a striver can easily renounce objects by rendering service to others. He can renounce them more easily if they are offered to deserving candidates and much more easily if they are offered to God. 11. Such a striver needs love and faith more than discrimination and dispassion. As Draupadi had the feeling of enmity towards the Kauravas, yet because of her faith in the Lord, he manifested himself before her when she called him. The Lord pays attention to the devotion and faith of his devotees rather than their evils, defects. Everyone can accept his affinity for him. Worship of attributeless God. 1. For such a striver, it is extremely difficult to fix the fickle and restless mind and senses on the attributeless and formless absolute. Because of the lack of any base and because of the lack of dispassion, there is more possibility for the striver to think of the sense objects. Second, the difficulty is greater for the striver who is attached to the body. A striver worshipping the attributeless absolute wants to get rid of this attachment through discrimination by depending upon his power, like the baby monkey, which, by depending upon its power, catches hold of its mother in order to protect itself. Therefore, in the Mansa, the Lord compares the wise with the adult son, while the devout devotee with the small son. Thus, by depending on his power, he is not free from attachment easily. Third, it does not declare that self-realization is instantly possible. Fourth, the devotees of the attributeless absolute attain to him with their own efforts. Fifth, they themselves attain to his being. 6. Such strivers come to know their evils, defects, late and they realize them with difficulty. But having realized them properly, they can remove them. 7. In this discipline, a preceptor is a must. Not being fully aware of the perfection of the preceptor or the preceptor not being perfect, it becomes very difficult for strivers to maintain their faith. Thus, it involves delay. 8. They can't realize his grace because they regard him attributeless, formless, and indifferent. So they don't realize his grace and so they have to cross the obstacles by their own efforts. Thus, self-realization may be delayed. 9. A Jnana Yogi also offers his actions to Prakriti, but it can be done only if his discrimination is fully aroused. Otherwise, he will be bound to actions by having pride of doership. 10. It is very difficult for such a striver to renounce objects by regarding them as illusory, so long as he has attraction for them and has egoistic notion and attachment to the so-called his body and name. 11. Such a striver attains the absolute only when he becomes qualified and deserving by possessing discrimination and a burning dispassion which can't be cultivated so long as a devotee is attached to the world. Verse 6. Ye tu sarvani karmani mai sanyasya matparaha ananyena yogena mam dhyayanta upaste. But those who worship me, surrendering all actions to me, regarding me as the supreme goal, meditating on me with single-minded devotion. Comment. In the Gita, the actions which are surrendered to God have been called Mad Arpana Karma, Mad Artha Karma, and Mat Karma. Mad Arpana Karma are those actions which were started with any other aim but are surrendered to God either during their performance or after their performance. Second, Mad Artha Karma are those actions which are performed only for God from the very beginning. They are performed by obeying Him in order to please and realize Him. Third, Mat Karma are all the mundane actions, business and service, etc., and spiritual actions, adoration and meditation, etc., which are performed for the sake of God by regarding them as gods. In fact, all the actions should be performed with the only aim of God realization. A devotee who performs actions in these three ways in order to attain perfection has not the least affinity for actions because he has neither desire for fruit, nor the sense of doership, nor attachment to objects. The body, senses, mind, intellect, and actions, etc. The actions of a perfect soul are naturally surrendered, while a striver performs actions with the aim of surrendering them to God. Verse 7. Tesham aham samudharta मृत्यु संसार सागरात भवामि न चिरात पार्था मया विष्टा चेतसाम. To those whose mind is set on me, I straightway deliver from the ocean of death-bound existence. O Partha, Arjuna. Comment. As the ocean consists of nothing but water, so is there nothing but death in the world. Nothing in the world is immune from the buffets of death. Everything is perishing, dying, all the time. So the world has been called the ocean of death-bound existence. The Lord rewards the men in whatever way they approach Him. So He declares that He is the same to all beings. But to those who love Him only, who perform all actions only for Him, and who, looking upon Him as the supreme goal, ever remain absorbed in chanting His name, thinking of Him, and meditating on Him, He straightway delivers them from the ocean of death-bound existence. A man is bound to face both the desirable and the undesirable circumstances, the favorable and the unfavorable circumstances and incidents, etc. By creating attachment and aversion, lead a man to bondage. Even strivers become a prey to attachment and aversion by being attached to their own sects and saints, and by having aversion to the rival sects and saints, and so they can't cross the ocean of death-bound existence quickly. Partiality to sects is the delusion which binds a man. So the Lord has laid special emphasis on the freedom from dualities, pairs of opposites, time and again. The Lord now commands Arjuna to become perfect in yoga by fixing his mind and intellect on Him, as He describes in the 8th verse, or through practice of concentration, or through the performance of actions for His sake, or through the renouncement of the fruit of actions, as He describes in the 9th, the 10th, and the 11th verses respectively. Verse 8. मयि एव मनः आधत्स्व मयि बुद्धिं निवेश्य निवसिष्यसि मय्येव अतः ऊर्ध्वं न संशयः. Fix thy mind on me alone. Fix thy intellect in me alone. Thereafter thou shalt live in me alone. There is no doubt about it. Comment. Fix thy mind on me. It means that the mind should be diverted from the thought of the world to God. Fix thy intellect in me. It means that the striver should have a firm resolve that he is only God's, only God is his, and he is the supreme to be attained. By doing so, he will cease thinking of the world, and his attachment to it will come to an end, and he will have affinity only for God. Fixation of intellect is more important than the fixation of mind. If he has a firm resolve with his intellect, his mind will also accept that resolution. If a person's aim is not God realization, he may attain accomplishment, siddhis, but he will not realize God. Therefore, a striver should have a firm resolve that he has to realize God. The desire for pleasures and prosperity is the greatest obstacle to this firm resolve. It is the desire for mundane pleasures which conduces him to acquire money, honor, and praise, etc. And thus the intellect of the irresolute is many branched and endless. But if he has the only resolve to realize God. This resolve is so sacred and powerful that the Lord becomes ready to consider even the most sinful one righteous. It is merely his resolve that he soon becomes righteous and attains to eternal peace. Verse 9. Atha chittam samadhatum na shaknoshi mai sthiram abhyasa yogena tato mam ichhaptum dhananjaya. If thou art unable to fix thy mind steadily on me, then seek to reach me by the constant practice of concentration, O winner of wealth. Arjuna. Comment. When a striver practices repeatedly, chanting his name, adoration, and hearing the scripture, etc., his mind is purified and the desire for God realization is aroused. When he remains equanimous in success and failure, the desire becomes keen. This keen desire makes him restless. This restlessness for God realization burns the mundane attachment as well as sense of infinite births. Then he develops an exclusive devotion to him, and then separation from God becomes unbearable for him. If he can't live without him, he also can't live without him, and so he attains him. A striver does not attain him immediately because he bears separation from him. As soon as this separation from him becomes unbearable, he is attained because he pervades everywhere. The only defect of a striver is that he has not a burning desire, and so he can't attain him immediately. It is because of his sensual desire that he thinks that he will be able to realize him only in future. As soon as there are restlessness and a burning desire for God realization, the desire for sensual pleasures will come to an end, and he will then be realized without any delay. If a striver in the beginning resolves that he has to realize only God, whatsoever may happen in the worldly sphere, he can very quickly realize God by any one of the paths of action, of knowledge, or of devotion. Verse 10. अभ्यासेऽप्यस्मर्थो असि मत्कर्मा परमो भव मद अर्थम अपि कर्माणि कुर्वन् सिद्धिम् अवाप्स्यसि. If you are unable to practice concentration, be thou intent on performing actions for me. Even by performing actions for my sake, thou shalt attain perfection. Comment. All actions according to one's caste, order of life, for earning livelihood and for maintenance of the body, as well as adoration, meditation, and chanting of his name and other spiritual activities, should instead of being performed for mundane pleasures and prosperity, be performed only for God realization. The actions which are performed for God realization according to his order are called mat karma, and the striver who is intent on performing actions for his sake is mat karma parma. Such a striver should have his affinity only for God, and his activities should also be performed only for God. As profit acts as an encouragement to a businessman and he tries to earn more and more money and more enthusiastically, so when all actions are performed for God's sake, the striver develops a keener desire for God realization and also practices spiritual discipline more enthusiastically. When he has such a burning desire that he can't bear separation from all pervading God, God does not remain veiled, but by his grace he is attained by him. If a striver's only aim is God realization and he performs all actions only for his sake, it means that he has applied his intellect, ability, time, and resources for God realization by considering them the Lord's. What can he do more than this? The Lord does not expect anything more from him, so he enables him to realize him. Verse 11. अथैतद् अप्यसक्तो असि कर्तुं मद्योगम् आश्रितः सर्वकर्मफलत्यागं ततः कुरु यतात्मवान्. If thou art unable to do even this, then subduing your mind, senses and intellect etc., resorting to yoga, equanimity, renounce the fruit of all actions. Comment. If a striver does not believe in God much, but he does social service and he can't surrender all actions to him, but renounces the fruit of action, the fruit which is beyond his power, his affinity for the world is renounced. The renouncement of fruit, desire for fruit of actions, is an independent means of God realization. When the desire for the fruit of actions is renounced, the attachment to the sense objects perishes and he attains peace, happiness of the mode of goodness. If he does not enjoy that peace, he attains perfection or God realization, that is, he becomes one with him. Verse 12. श्रेयो हि ज्ञानम् अभ्यासाज्ञानात् ध्यानं विशिष्यते ध्यानात् कर्म फल त्यागास्त्यागाच्छन्तिरनन्तरम्. Better indeed is knowledge than the practice of concentration. Better than knowledge is meditation. Better than meditation is the renunciation of the fruit of action. Supreme peace immediately follows renunciation. Comment. The Lord from the 8th verse to the 11th verse recommended 4 alternative means in the event of Arjuna's failure to adopt the one. Fixation of the mind and intellect in him, practice of concentration, performance of action for his God's sake, and renunciation of the fruit of actions. So a person may think that they have been mentioned in the descending order of merit. Moreover, in the first 3 means there is mention that they will attain him, while in the last one there is no mention of it. So they may think that the means mentioned in the 11th verse is inferior to the other means. All the 4 means are independent in order to realize God. A striver can follow any one of them according to his inclination, faith, and qualifications, etc. A striver should never consider the means, spiritual discipline, followed by him to be inferior to other paths and should never lose heart so far as God realization is concerned. If the only aim of a striver is God realization, the means followed is according to his inclination, faith, and qualification, and it is practiced to the best of his capacity and with promptness, having a burning desire for God realization. His means will lead him to God realization without any doubt. The reason is that God is omniscient. He, having known the striver's intention and efforts, etc., by his grace, conduces him to God realization. Every human being is authorized to God realization because the Lord, by his grace, has bestowed upon him this human body so that he may realize him. No 2 persons can possess the worldly materials equally because they acquire them according to their fate. But everyone can realize God equally because he is not realized through actions. This passion for the world and a keen desire for God realization are 2 important factors for God realization. Though any one of the 2 can conduce a striver to God realization, yet a keen desire is a more powerful means than this passion. Out of the 4 means, the first 3 specially arouse desire for God realization, while the 4th one, renunciation of the fruit of action, conduces a striver to renounce affinity for the world. When a striver feels that the mundane pleasures are painful and he renounces them from the heart, then having his aim of God realization, he will automatically progress towards spiritualism and realize him by his grace. Similarly, If God is the most loving to him and he can't bear separation from him, his unbearable restlessness will also lead him to God realization. Om Tat Sat. All glories to Shri Partha Sarthi, Lord Shri Krishna. All glories to Bhagavad Vani, Srimad Bhagavad Geeta. Sri Hari Arpanamastu.